back to the screen. Does anybody, can you tell if we're recording? Without me flipping back?
Yep, it says
Yes.
recording has started.
Sweet, thanks guys. Okay, so I already said this a second ago, but for the sake of this recording, let me just say, we're going to talk about parts 2 and 3 today of Power BI. Part 2 is how to use Power BI Desktop to import data from Excel, to transform the data set in different ways, and then how to use the main desktop window to create visualizations, how to refresh your data and save your report and data file. So that's part 2. After that, if it looks like we all need a break and there's time, we'll just take a quick break. And then after the break, or maybe not, we're going to talk about how to share what you've made with other people. So publishing and sharing on powerbi.com. I'm going to, for the most part, not be using this PDF, but it is here, so you don't have to be taking copious notes. You can just follow along. So I'm going to head on over to, we're starting here, using Power BI Desktop. And with that, I want to start using it. So everybody should have already tried to open Power BI Desktop. So do that again right now. I have an icon on my desktop. I'm going to double click it. You'll notice that the desktop version is significantly more laggy than powerbi.com, especially if you have large data sets, but that's to be expected, so never fear. You get this welcome mat when you open, just close it down. And the first thing we're going to do is sign in. So up in the upper right where it says sign in, click that. Enter your email address. Since you're at the PIHP and everybody at the PIHP has got the special license, you can just enter in your PIHP email address. So for me, it's sahutj@cmhpsm.org. So enter your own. And this is the part where we have to do our multi-factor authentication. So I hope you guys have your phones ready. And then once you've fully signed in, it should say your name in the upper right. I'm going to give you guys just another second to do that. While you're doing that, let me just say, the data set that we're using as an example today comes from, it's based on report 1020A, the authorizations report in Cricut Reports. This is a list of all authorizations for all of our consumers. Oh, it says 1002 up here and it's actually 1020. And I think I made that mistake all the way through. So that's good. Anyway, it's this one, the author report. We have a de-identified version of this report that you guys got ahead of time. That's just so that we can be recording this and not be flashing consumer IDs or anything. But the real report would work the exact same way. And for this de-identified simplified version, it is all authorizations between 10/1/19 and 10/31/19. So it's a very small, relatively small data set. Okay, everybody ready to move to the next step? Everybody signed in? Anybody not signed in? Okay, so there are a lot of ways you can get data into Power BI. There's all these different ones up here. Because it's the simplest, I'm going to first talk about how to do it from an Excel file. So there's a few ways you could go to File, Get Data, Excel, or you could have just hit that right there. It says Excel under Data, or it's actually straight up on your little canvas. But however you do it, navigate to that data set that you saved a local copy of ahead of time. Hit Open. Okay. So this is the download of that Cricut report. And if you've ever run a Cricut report, you know there's usually multiple sheets in there. One of the sheets would be the data dictionary, which tells you the name of all the columns and the definition. And then there may be more. In this one, there's another one called details that just has all the odds. So this is a nice feature. You can know ahead of time by looking at the preview which sheet you want to pick up. So we're going to check the one that says details. Now, if this were the millionth time you're using this data set and you know there's no further cleaning or adding or transforming of any form that you need to do, you could go straight to load. But it is best practice, especially since this is the first time we're grabbing the data, to actually go to transform data. This is where we take the scenic route. We're going to take a little bit of a detour and do all of our transformations on the data set before we start using it. So when you hit that, you're brought to something called the Power Query Editor. Everything that you do here is a programmable step, meaning every time you refresh the data, the things that you do here will be repeated. And you only have to do it this one time, theoretically. So there's a zillion things you could do here. I'm gonna go through just a few of the steps that might be useful to you. But I do want to give a plug for the Microsoft website. They have all sorts of trainings that you could take that would tell you the full story on how to use Power Query Editor. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is when I look at how the data were read in, the first row of that Excel file actually had a title. It said % of authorized units used as of report run date, da, 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 da. And then the next row was the column names. So it actually read it in wrong. I can see that. And this must happen a lot because they have a ready-made button to fix that. When this happens, you hit the button that says use first row as headers. This is called promoting the headers. And now you can see it's right. The column names are the right column names. Another thing you're going to want to do is when this read in, it named this data set according to the sheet name. And that's really not going to be helpful in months or maybe years from now. You're looking back at this and saying, where did I even get this data set? So you want to give it a name that describes to you, your future self, where the data came from. So to do that, right click it, hit rename. And I'm going to say Cricut report 1020A, not 1002. Notice, I don't know if you guys can see, if you can see all this very well, but every time I do something, it's adding it as an applied step. So like if I didn't like one of the things I did, if I made the mistake, oh, I didn't want to rename it, you can actually hit the X and say undo. I don't want that to be a programmed step when the data are read in. So this is keeping track of all the stuff you did. In here, another handy thing is you can change the data type. So what Power BI did is it read in the first 1,000 rows, and based on that information, it made its best guess at whether the data was supposed to be numeric, like something you could add up, take the average of, categorical, so just words, dates, percents, that kind of thing. Most of the time it's right, but it can be wrong. And you would want to fix that here if that happened, especially if it was reading in a numeric variable as categorical. Like, for example, let's say the effective date was reading in as ABC. You'd want to change that to a date. So let me just for a second pretend it read it in as ABC. I'm going to change it. Base current. So you would know it was wrong because you'd see ABC here and it's left aligned. That's not right. This will really mess with your analyses later. So to change the data type, right on that icon that describes the data type, you click it and then you just make it whatever you want. In this case, I'd want it as a date. And you'd hit replace current. So that's more of a absolutely must have. Some of these changes you must treat numeric variables as numeric. There's some other niceties you could do at this point if you want. For example, this percent, it's reading as a decimal. You could, if you wanted to, change that to actually read in as percentage. Base current, it's up to you, this kind of thing. At this point, you could also add a variable. Like you guys are the SUD team, only some of these things really apply to you. Just the auths that are authorized by a SUD agency. So one variable that might be useful that's not already in the data set is a variable to tell us whether the auth is for SUD or not. And you would base it on the organization type of the provider. If it's SUD agency, then it's a SUD auth, and if not, then it's not. So to do that, since it's based on another variable, you would go to add column up at the top, and you would say conditional column. And the reason I'm saying conditional is because it's conditioning on another variable here. Conditional column. Have any of you used Excel and used those nasty if statements? Anybody? Well, okay.
Only in the other meaning.
It's not. It's really ugly and messy. This is much preferred to me, at least. It's much more intuitive. So if you can do it here, you would do it here. This is where that's possible. So I'm going to make a new variable. I'm going to call it SUD or MH. And I'm going to say if, scroll down, where was it? Organization type is, now this part, you do have to actually type it in exactly as written, no extra spaces, no misspellings. SUDAGENCY. You don't need quotes. So if the organization type is SUD agency, what do I want my new variable to say? SUD. I could at this point say otherwise MH. But I just happen to know that there are a few auths in here where for some reason the organization type is blank. And I don't want to just hand that an MH. I would like to leave it blank if the organization type is blank. So I'm going to add one more clause in here. Add clause. Else if organization type is, and the way you say blank, you don't leave it blank. You actually type in the word NULL, null. Then I want that back, NULL, null. So in English, this is saying I have a new variable called SUD or MH. The way it's defined is, if the organization type is SUD agency, then my new variable will say SUD. Otherwise, if it's blank, then my new variable will also be blank. Otherwise, if none of the above, then call it MH. And when you hit OK, you can see the new variable added in there, the very last column. This is so much better than those if statements, I think, especially nested ifs. So we've used Power Query Editor to talk about how to transform the variables themselves, how to add columns. But another thing you can do in here is you can use it to troubleshoot sort of off-color data. You can look for anomalies. To do that, you go to the View tab. And you start hitting, there's a few of these options. If you hit column distribution, this will give you little histograms or bar charts or whatever of the first 1,000 rows. So like what I'm seeing is there's only 3 distinct values for affiliate. That's because it's the first 1,000 rows. There's more than 3 affiliates. But if it said there were 10 distinct values, now you'd know there's something wrong with your data. You don't have to scroll through it to look. And you can get a feel for all the data real quick, like that. The second one, column profile, gives you a close-up look at, like if I hit affiliate, now it's showing me what those 3 distinct were in the top 1,000, Washington, Livingston, a little bit of Lenawee, and a few other stats. And then the last one I want to show you is column quality. This will show you how many are, quote, valid, how many are in error. I don't really know what that means. I've never had anything that said error, but empty, I get what that means. How many are blank? So if you saw something in here that was troubling you, you could go and transform the data and just basically do all of your cleanup before you get cracking on making reports with the data set. Okay, so once you've got all your steps, how you want every sort of transformation you want to do on the data, again, programmed in, you'll never have to do it again. Every time you refresh the data, all these steps will be taken. Once you're done, go to Home, and then hit Close and Apply. And it's going to start thinking, there we go. It's loading up my data. So where we are right now, this is the main, I don't know what it's called. I'm just going to call it the main desktop window, I guess, but it's not Power Query Editor. The place that we just were was a detour before we came here. And let me also say that if you ever want to get back to the Power Query Editor, you would hit this Transform Data. So, okay, here we are. This is the main desktop window. There are 3 views that you're going to want to be familiar with. The first is the view where we are right now. This is the report view. This is the canvas upon which you're going to add all your visualizations. This is where this is what you're showing the viewer. And that you get to that by hitting this little bar chart icon, report view. The next is the data view, and this shows you a spreadsheet view of the underlying data set. Looks a little bit like Excel, or also a little bit like Power Query Editor. Shows you the different values in your data set. And then the third view is the model view. In this particular example, we're only pulling in one data set and it's showing it right here, but it's not going to be uncommon that somebody wants to pull in multiple data sets and then hook them up by like keys, like by case number or something like that. So this is the view where you would see all those hookups, how they're related to each other. So I want to just, there's a million things obviously you can do on each of these views. I just want to show you the main stuff in each one at a time. So what can you do here in model view? Well, if you go over to the fields pane and click the drop down, you see all the variables, affiliate, age, amount not yet paid, et cetera, et cetera. This, if you click on any one of these variables, you see a whole bunch of properties that you can change about it. Like you could change the name, like instead of CPT mod, I could say CPT mod 1. You could have a description so that when people hover over it, they get a full dictionary sort of definition of what it is. Synonyms when people are searching for it. This thing, display folder, I think this is really cool. So if you have a giant number of columns and it's becoming hard for you to find what you need, you can group them into sort of folders. So the way you do that, like I'm hitting the control key and I'm clicking all the CPT mods at once. So I could type in here modifiers and hit enter. And now they're all grouped into the modifiers folder. A lot easier to find stuff this way. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do also here. I'm not going to hit on it. I will though reference the training where you can learn about that stuff. So that's model view. Let's go back to data view and talk about what can be done here. So I showed you how you could add a column in Power Query Editor. There are actually 3 different ways you could add a column to your data set. And this is in order of preference. The very best way to do it is actually on my end for me to add it to the data set before it ever gets to you. That takes the least memory and resources. But if you don't really know for sure that you want that, you're just trying stuff out, you don't want to have me make a permanent change to the underlying data set. The second choice is what I showed you in Power Query Editor. That is preferable to the third choice, which is doing it here. Why would you ever do it here? There are some times where you don't have the authority to make changes to the Power Query Editor through the Power Query Editor, and this is all you've got. It's not a huge problem if you make variables here, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot uglier. So like that thing we did where we made a new variable called SUD or MH. Here it is. If you tried to do it here, it would be with nested ifs using a syntax called DAX, which is a lot like Excel formulas, meaning it's pretty ugly. So, but it is an option, and it's not going to kill anybody to use it if need be. This is something that's really different, though. This is different than Excel, and it's worth noting. There are special kinds of columns that you add in Power BI that where you know you're going to be doing some sort of aggregation ahead of time. You have to add that aggregation in at this point. There's only one place to do it, and it's right here. And that special kind of column is called a measure. So let me say that again, because I feel like I just sort of hashed that. If you know ahead of time, and you often do, that you're going to be doing a certain kind of aggregation in your analysis, like I know I'm going to want to know number of cases or total amount auth, total units, whatever. You have to define those things ahead of time. Those are called measures, and that can only be done here in the data view. So let's do an example of that. To do it, you hit new measure. We're going to start programming in DAX. So like, I know that in this analysis, I'm going to want to know number of distinct cases for however I end up slicing and dicing the data. So the first thing you do is you start typing the name of your measure, of your new variable. And I'm going to just say distinct cases. You can use spaces, it doesn't matter. And then you hit an equal sign. So the nice thing about this is it has a lot of autofill options. So if I start typing distinct, I can see already it's giving me 3 choices. Yeah, I want distinct count. You can hit tab once you see the formula you're after. And you could actually just like scroll through. This is giving you your choices for your variables. But if it's super long, you can just start typing case number. Oh, okay. All I had to do is type case, and it found it when I hit tab. Right, paren, and then enter. So unlike when I made that variable called MH or SUD and we got to see it actually in the data set, you don't see measures in the data set, but you do see it here listed under the fields. And it has this special icon next to it showing it's a measure. It's one of those special kinds of fields. So that's the thing that's very special about this screen, making measures. Then the last thing is when you've really got your data set ready to roll, you've got all the transformations done, you've got your measures defined, that's when you go to report view and you start creating your visuals. So this is a huge, huge topic. I'm only going to cover the most basic stuff. And really, though, they all kind of work the same. It's very intuitive, I think. So the way you make visuals in Power BI is you click on a visual from the visualizations pane, and then you drag the important fields into the parameters for that visualization. So for example, if I want to make a clustered column chart, this is the 4th one on the top row, click clustered column chart. And what you get is a blank clustered column chart first. And when I'm clicked on this, in the visualization pane, I see all the parameter fields for that visualization. So let's say I want to look at a bar chart of distinct cases. That measure I just made, drag that over to values. And if you've used a pivot table before, this should sort of feel familiar. In the bottom right corner of the pivot table, is that values, and that's where you end up getting your aggregates. It's the same thing. You took an aggregate. It was just defined ahead of time, and you throw it in the values box. And this is hugely unhelpful. It's just telling us there are 9,390 distinct cases in the data set. But when it becomes helpful is when you start dragging other variables over. So I'm going to take affiliate as an example and drag it to the access box. And you can resize this however you want. And voila, a visualization. I could have, by the way, moved it to legend. Sometimes that's better, not here. Again, all visualizations work the exact same way. You just click one and you drag your stuff in here. And by the way, you can change it by just clicking a different visualization icon. Okay, so that's basically making a report. Suppose this is all we wanted, was just a nice clustered column chart with number of distinct cases by affiliate. The next step, and you always do this for everything you work on, is saving your work. So to do that, you go to File, Save As, and the file format for Power BI reports is .pbix. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot today, so it's worth noting. Where am I going to save my PBIX file? I'm just going to, whatever, put it on my desktop, my auth report. If I ever want to get back to it, if I just close desktop, let's pretend it's like a whole new day. Oh, there's my auth report. Oops. Double click it, and I get right to where I was a second ago. Are there any questions while we wait for this slow thing to load the data? Everybody okay? Is anybody still there?
Still here.
Okay, good. Not talking to myself. That's good. Okay, so suppose this is a Cricut report where you got your data set from, and you're going to want to pull it, let's say, every month or something, and you want to refresh your data. If you download your new Excel file into the exact same folder with the exact same name, in other words, if you just replace the old file with a new one, same name, same spot, then all you have to do is hit refresh and you'll refresh your data. But if, let's say, you are going to have December download, January download, February download, if it's a different name or a different location when you re-download the data, there's a few other steps you need to take in order to refresh your data. So to do that, you need to go back to the Power Query Editor. And again, to do that, you hit Transform Data. You guys are, I didn't give you the second version, so just watch this. You don't need to click along. So if I go to Data Source Settings, you can see where it thinks that the data is coming from. If I hit Change Source, I ahead of time saved something called version 2. Here it is, V2. I hit Open, OK, Close. Now, you're not going to see anything happen until you hit refresh preview, but once you do, you should see, yeah. So the version 2 is just everything besides the first, I deleted everything besides the first 13 rows of data. Okay, so now this is my refreshed version of the data. Notice I didn't have to promote headers. I didn't have to rename the data set. All my applied steps are done. I hit close and apply. And in a second, it's loading the new data. And voila, it was only 13 rows. Our new data set. And if I hit save, this PBIX file replaces the other one. So that is basically creating reports. We talked about how to import an Excel file. We talked about how to transform the data in program steps through the Power Query Editor so that every time you refresh the data, it does all those same steps. We talked about how to look at the model view, put stuff in folders. We talked about how to look at the data view, make measures, and in report view, how to add visualizations and add fields to those visualizations. Are there any questions or comments before we start talking about publishing and sharing? Okay. Do you guys want to take a break, or do you want to just keep going to sharing and publishing? This went faster than I expected, and I'm not sure if that's because I went too fast, but I certainly have the energy to keep going. So if I don't hear anything, I am going to keep going. What do you guys think?
Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. All right. Thanks, guys. Okay. So you have a PBIX file. Anybody who has access to this PBIX file and Microsoft Power BI Desktop can see this report. They'd be able to open it just like you did. However, it would just be a point in time view of your analysis, like a PDF or something. If you want to share your report in a dynamic way, meaning every time the data are refreshed, the report would refresh, then you would want to publish it to powerbi.com and then share it with them. Those are two separate steps. I think it's probably worth hitting this page, because honestly, this is still so confusing to me. There's so many if-thens in how to share stuff, but unlike sharing a PBIX file that only requires that the person has Power BI Desktop, this has other requirements, a lot more restrictions on it. Not everybody is going to be able to see what you try to share with them. The first restriction is your recipients need a special Power BI license to view your content. Everybody at the PIHP has this special license, so there shouldn't be any problem sharing with other people at the PIHP. But right now, there is only one such license at each CMH. So for example, you wouldn't be able to publish and share with Wendy Cadu at Lenaway CMH. You have to do it to the special Lenaway username, which we can supply you with. So they have to have that special license, and there's only one of those per CMH. The other thing is, even if they have the license, they have to be a member of our tenant, or they have to be in a tenant that the PIHP allows as a trusted source. So if you're trying to share outside of our organization and they're not seeing it, then you would need to talk to Michelle about who and why. And if it's approved, then she can adjust the settings to allow it. So all that said, to publish your report, you go to Publish in Power BI. So that's right up here, Publish. When you hit that, it's giving you all these choices for what workspace you want to publish from. You can publish in what's called My Workspace, which is like the My Documents sort of version in Power BI. And you can publish in any workspace where you have a role of at least being what's called a member. But if you're a viewer, you can't. Most of the workspaces set up by the PIHP will not allow you to publish in there. We're trying to not have another chaotic M drive here. We're trying to keep it clean. Until we figure out the protocols on where we would like people to publish, we're asking that you publish from what's called My Workspace. So at this point, please hit My Workspace, select, publishing out to Power BI. Success. So now we have published it, but we still haven't shared it. The sharing part is done at powerbi.com. So this is the part of the training where we have to get out our phones again and do the multi-factor authentication thing. We're going to go to Chrome or wherever you do stuff and go to powerbi.com. Sign in and do this annoying thing. Not annoying, secure. I mean secure. 81701. Oh, good grief.
Jess, do you want us to be doing this with you?
I
I
mean, if it were me, I would, because it helps me to have muscle memory to learn things, but it's up to you. So here we are on powerbi.com, and from part one, you remember that there are workspaces, and that's probably the most important part of this screen. If I hit workspaces, I see all those listed workspaces and then my workspace. That's where I published from. So I'm clicking it. And there it is. And it's all shiny and new. It has those little shine marks on it. That's the thing I just published. And I know it's the thing I just published because it says right there at 1:41 p.m. That's today. That's a couple minutes ago. So this is now a published report. It has not yet been shared.
Jess,
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering, so the difference between when you do the Power BI on desktop versus powerbi.com, like if you did all of this, what we just did on powerbi.com, then it's already published, correct?
You can't do this on powerbi.com, I don't think.
Okay.
There are some there. Okay, let me backpedal a tiny bit. There are technically ways that you can create reports, but not do data transformations. You can only create visualizations from pre-published report data sets on powerbi.com. But I have found that is so full of bugs and it crashes that I'm pretending that it doesn't exist. Until they work that out, I don't even want to deal with it. I've reported it, and that's up to Microsoft to deal. But this is a fact. Bugs or not, there is no way to do those data transformations except on the desktop. Does that answer your question?
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so getting that, this is now a published report, but again, it's not shared yet. In order to share it, you have to click right right here, this little share arrow. So if you hit that, you're brought to this little screen, and it's telling you right now, by default, the settings are that people in your organization with the link can view this. So anybody for whom the link has been made available, they'll be able to see this report, and you would copy the link and send it to them. But if that's not what you want, then you click that, and now you get three options. You could change it to people with existing access. This is like, I don't know that this is very useful to you guys, but all right, what this means is, let's say you had a workspace and there are people who've been made members or contributors to that workspace or admin. So they automatically get blanket access to everything that's in that workspace. Those are people with existing access. If you clicked that, then you would get the link that you would want to send to those people. The third choice is specific people. This is where it's not everybody at my organization. I don't have this blanket access. I just want to send it to Nicole, let's say. And by the way, there are two additional options here. You could allow them to share the report and allow them to build reports based on the data set. You can choose that. But once you click, let's say specific people, and you hit apply, it brings you to a screen where you get to type in people's, let's say I wanted to share it with Nicole, email, and then send, and it would send her a little email that says, hey, I shared this report with you. So let's say you've been doing this sharing and sharing with people, and then you're like, I don't even remember who I shared this with. To manage the permissions that have already been set up, you go here, that ellipsis right next to the word send link, and hit manage permissions. And you can see right now, I'm the only one who has access. I didn't actually send it to Nicole yet. And you can actually add access right here if you want. Let me just say, you could also do that. If you click the ellipsis next to the report name, that's an option right here as well. I believe it's the exact same thing. Okay. So far, so good, you guys? Any questions about that? It's about to get just a slight bit more hairy. So are we okay with this?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, whoever that was.
Yes.
Thanks, James. That was you. All right, now here's the last bit. This is it. I'm trying not to make this as complicated as it feels to me. So I'm sorry if this is a mess, but I really, for the last bit, I want to talk about what happens when you're on the receiving end of a share, what you can and cannot do. So I am right here now on, I just talked about that. Using Power BI data sets that have been shared with or authored by you. I'm going to go back to desktop. Actually, you know, you can go straight to your next step, but if you're getting out of a data set and you want to make a new one, I find it works better to just close it out. It's so laggy. Save, sure. So if a published Power BI data set has been made available to you, you can actually get to it straight from Power BI Desktop as long as you're signed in as you. That's why we signed in the beginning. So we wait for this. And we have the welcome mat. No, thank you. So before, when we wanted to go get data, we hit Excel. And again, you could have done it here or you could have gone from file. This time we're going to go Power BI data sets. And what I see are all the Power BI data sets, the published Power BI data sets to which I have access. I can see there's one of them that was made by Lenaway. I've been given access. Most of these, I'm the author. If you hit one of these, like let's say I want the SUD outcomes, and this is the report that we were looking at for part 1, and I hit create. I can now make visualizations based on that underlying data set. What I cannot do is, can't get to Power Query Editor. You're not allowed to transform the data. You're only allowed to use it. I can't even get to Data View. Can't transform the data, can only use it. So this is only really going to be useful when the data set is like in its finished form and you just want to make a different graph on it based on the data. You don't want to do any additions or changes. But that's pretty useful, actually. If you know the data set's done, you just want to make graphs. So then you could do the same thing. You could choose data set and you could grab your measures, number of whatever. Note, this will not refresh unless you publish it out to powerbi.com and it gets put in the matrix again. So again, this is just like a PDF pretty much. It's a fixed point in time look at the data when you pulled it in, like today. Tomorrow it'll look the same. Wednesday or next week it'll look the same. Until you publish this out to powerbi.com, it's going to be the same. But once you publish it, it'll get refreshed as often as the source data is refreshed. And a lot of these source data sets, they could be refreshed every day. So the desktop is a still life. PowerBI.com is dynamic. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay, if it doesn't make sense, stop me.
Jess, is there any way? I mean, I think we would move to using the online version, but is there any way to refresh the data when you're just in your Power BI desktop?
At the desktop, you have access to the same network that the author of that data set has. So for example, if I'm pulling in this data set from the report server, I created this when I was in the report server. If you are also in the report server, then you could hit refresh and it would refresh. But if you're doing this on your own desktop, you're not in the same network as the report server, it won't refresh. You have to go out to powerbi.com. It's a great question. But let's say I have an Excel file and it's on the M drive and I made a report from that and I have the PBIX. No, not that, sorry. And I publish it. I think that person could hit refresh, but I don't actually know. I know that if you had the PBIX, you could hit refresh, but this I haven't tested. We can try it. Any other questions? So again, the report you create will not refresh unless it's been published out to powerbi.com. And when that happens, it can be refreshed as often as the source Power BI data set is refreshed. James had a question about whether you could do it in desktop. I think that if you're on the same network as where the original source data was pulled from, that you can, but I will test it and get back to you. So those are called Power BI data sets. That's these things. That's different than the next thing I'm going to show you, which is, remember I said anyone with the PBIX file can create, they'll see your report and your data set. So what if you're on the receiving end of a PBIX file? So you're looking at someone else's report. Either let's say they saved the PBIX on the M drive, or if you've been given permission, you can actually get to it in powerbi.com. So let me show you what I mean. In powerbi.com, if you go to data sets, you'll see all the data. This is the same thing as when you went into the desktop and you said Power BI data sets. Some of these, if this report was published in a workspace where you have been granted at least member privileges, then one of the options you will see on this ellipsis is download the PBIX. So again, you could either get the PBIX, like if someone saved it on a drive that you have access to, or if you've been given this kind of permission. If you hit download the PBIX, it takes a bit because this is like a huge data set. So I'm going to save this on the desktop, and just like I did a second ago where I had a PBIX file and I double clicked it and then I opened it and then I opened it in desktop, I'm going to do that same thing. So show the desktop. You know what I just realized I did? I saved it with its original name, SUD outcomes. This is someone else's report. If you're downloading a PBIX from someone else's report, what I should have done there, instead of just saying SUD outcomes, my version of SUD outcomes, you really need to change the name, because if you publish this thing out, you might end up overwriting someone's work. So just best practice, if you are pulling a PBIX file from somebody else's work, give it a new name. And now double clicking it, it'll open this in Power BI desktop. And unlike what I did a second ago, where there was no way to transform the data, I get those options here. And this is going so slow. And unlike what I did a second ago where I got the data set, I was starting from scratch when I just pulled the Power BI data set. This one, you get everything. You get the report definition as well. So let's say you liked the report except for one tiny little thing you wanted to tweak. You could do that tweak and then publish it out to powerbi.com and have your own version, but you would want to use a different name. So transform data, I believe you should be able to get to. This is where it gets squirrely because I can't log in as anybody but Lenaway and myself. So I don't know what yours looks like, but I believe you can transform the data and data view is available. Like Power BI data sets, these data will not refresh unless A, you have access to the original source data. Like, again, this is pulled from the report server. Unless you're doing this on the report server, none of you are. Unless you're doing it on the report server, you don't have access to this data set. So hitting refresh, you get an error. Or if you publish it out to powerbi.com, then it would get hooked up into the matrix, and every time the source data refreshes, your report would refresh. And I want to just put a double underline. Be sure to save. If you're doing this from somebody else's report and you're just doing a couple tweaks, be sure to save and publish with a different name so you don't overwrite somebody's work. It would warn you, but a lot of times we miss warnings. Okay, one last little gasp here. There are certain cases where, like, let's say downloading the Cricut Report Excel data and importing it into Power BI is like something you would have to do every day, and it's a big giant data set, and you can't ever seem to like pull enough data out of Cricut reports. Like you're constantly running data downloads and uploads. Then you might be a good candidate for having a Power BI data set plunked right into like just made available to you every single day. This is not something that can automatically be done, but there's an approval process. But if you don't have access to a data set in Power BI that meets your needs, and doing in Cricut reports is just way too much work, then talk to Michelle or myself. If it is approved, then we can set you up with a Power BI data set that feeds directly from the report server and is refreshed regularly. I'm imagining finance would probably use something like this because they have big giant data sets. It would be a pain to download out of Cricut reports. So that's basically what I wanted to say today. Everything I talked about is just pulled little bits and pieces out of the Certified Data Analyst Associate training in Microsoft on the website, which is linked right here. I barely covered any of it, honestly. There's so very much more. If you want, you should, not even if you want, I strongly recommend that if you're serious about making reports in Power BI, that you take maybe a day and click on this and go through those tutorials. There's so much more to do than what I said. That said, if you have questions and if I'm able to answer them, I will try my best to answer them, but I'm a beginner too, so I basically know what's in this link. And that is it. Any questions, you guys?